All right, well, good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say hello, and we're excited for this webinar to bring this to you. We're going to give it just a couple more minutes to allow for some additional attendees to get on. So we'll be starting probably about 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, so we'll get things started. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clark Miller, and I am the most recent addition to the Egan Berger and Weiner financial planning team. And I'm here alongside with Howard Pressman, another advisor with the firm. And we're really excited to be able to bring you this quarter's webinar regarding the global demographic trends and how it relates to you personally. Jim Lindsay, President of Adult Companion Care, will be talking with us today about the trends, about these trends, and we'll even be able to answer some questions you have at the end of today's call. That being said, please feel free to submit any questions you have during the presentation. We'll be able to answer those at the end of the call. That will be in the questions box located on the control panel. Jim and his family had to deal with the difficulties surrounding elder care in 1992 with his grandmother, and dealing with these issues surrounding long-term care, the family decided to establish the ACC 20 years ago and have been serving the needs of the elderly ever since. Today, the adult companion care continues to flourish, extending the independence of seniors by offering assisted living in-home. Jim received his bachelor's degree at Oklahoma Baptist University, and he's worked in the United States Senate in various positions and even completed his MBA at Oxford University in England, where he actually focused on global aging issues. So we're really excited to have him here to speak with you, and I will now give the presentation over to him. So thank you, Jim.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and thank Clark and Howard for letting me come and give you guys information certainly on global aging issues. And so I'm going to go through the trends very quickly. This is designed for the clients that Howard and Clark have for you guys so that you can know what's sort of coming. The nice thing about trend demographics, as you can see on the slide, is that lots of people are trying to guess what's going to happen in the future, and anybody can guess on what might happen with the economy and world politics, etc. But demographics are, in fact, very substantial and more objective, not subjective. And so if you look at demographic trends, you can more easily discern what's coming up rather than just guess. So with this, this presentation looks at three basic pieces of the demographic forces: the fertility and replacement rates, and then the death curve and longevity, and then demographic dividends. Demographic dividends may be a new term for most, but it's we'll get to that. But these three factors then are the most informative on what's coming in the global aging arena. So with that, let me just get into some of these. The world population statistics, as you see in your slide now. We hit the 6 billionth mark with Adnan Nevic, born on the 12th of October in Bosnia. And then we hit the 7 millionth mark on the 31st on Halloween of 2012. And you see that Danica May Camacho, born in Manila, and she was the 7th billion person, and for that great honor she received the chocolate cake and a gift certificate for free shoes. Now there's a lot of concern that we're going to overpopulate our planet, and I deal with a lot of different people in different seminars, and they say, oh my gosh, overpopulation is going to overcome everything, but you'll be happy to know that currently the projections that the world population will peak at 8 billion in 2050, but because of declining fertility rates, therefore the world population will begin to shrink. And that's good news for a lot of different people that have had the concern of overpopulation for a long time. So with that, there's been a sharp decline in the global fertility rate, as you see on the screen. This comes from The Economist magazine. And this declining fertility rate is what's going to contribute to that ceasing or the peaking of population in 2050. So with that, we are going to, we're just growing, we're having smaller families, and people are having less babies, and with that, then the global population is going to go down. This does have an impact on your planning that you're going to need to know, and so we'll get to that in a moment. The replacement rate, with the declining fertility rates, a 2.1 replacement rate, or fertility rate, I'm sorry, a population will cease growing if it goes anywhere below 2.1. So every family that has 2 kids, that's basically the replacement rate. If you have less than 2 kids per family, then your population is declining. And then so you see there, in 2011, 3.2 billion people lived in countries with a fertility rate of 2.1 or less. But that is in fact growing. So in 1970, the global fertility rate was 4.45. In 2011, the global rate was 2.45. And so you can see that our fertility rates, as they drop, means that we're not replacing populations in different countries. So with that, in 2013, 2/3 of the world's economy, or world's countries, have dropped below the replacement rate. Now, Bangladesh, current or in the past has been extraordinarily high in terms of replacement rates and fertility rates, is now down to 2.16. You see there on your screen, Iran is at 1.6, and Hong Kong has the lowest global fertility rate in the world. And so Japan, they could lose as much by 2050, as you see. They could lose as much as 1/3 of their population due to the combination of low fertility / replacement rates and the aging population in Japan. Germany at 1.42 replacement rate is going to lose about 21% of its current population. Now these numbers are not driven by guesses. These numbers are driven, well, the only guess would be the death rate, which we'll get to in a second, but for the most part these are hard numbers that are based on demography. And so you can see that there's different populations that are declining in size. Now this is a little bit of a fancy full screen, but we put it in anyway. If you, and this comes from The Economist magazine, but if the replacement rates and fertility rates were to continue unchecked, these are when countries would cease to exist as far as not having any more babies. Now again, this is not going to happen, but it does illustrate the fact that it's incredible in terms of global history how our fertility rates are dropping. So Hong Kong, if everything continues, would have the last birth of its last woman in 2798, certainly not anytime soon, but it shows the dramatic decline globally of different fertility rates. Now let me move to the death curve, because if you have smaller families and dropping fertility rates, then what does the back end of that, the death curve, do? In the past, the death curve was a steady downward slope. And you see there in the screen, 1851, by age 45, half the population was alive. and half was dead. That means from 45 there was a slow, gradual decline to death. But because of better medical care and other healthcare concerns that have been answered, in 2013 the half mark has been moved to 85 instead of 45. So right now globally, half the population is 85 and by 85 half the population is alive and half is dead. And so it's generally happening now across westernized countries and really across the world, mostly in westernized countries. People are living into their mid to late 80s in relative good health. That means post-retirement, if you retire around 65, you're looking at some 20 and 30 years of post-retirement living, given the fact that most of our financial instruments and most of our population in terms of planning has not factored that into their planning. So the death rate is globally falling, near 3% lower since 2007. And across the globe, as you see there, if you were interested in looking it up at theworldbank.com, people are living longer across the whole world. So you see now in terms of longevity that the Jim Lehrer News Hour, that the number of people age 85 and older is slated to increase. And in fact, 85 and older is the fastest growing segment of the population in the United States. So you can see there 4.3 million people fall into the oldest old category, but it's expected to go up to 8.5 million. Now, not listed here, but the highest expenditure of Medicare funds for people happens in the last 2 years of their life. So what's happening is as people are living longer, they're expending more money, and the United States and other countries will expend more and more money on the oldest old category, which is the fastest growing category. Now in Europe, if you look, there are 12,000 persons over 100 years of age. By 2050, it'll be 500,000. Year 3000, there'll be over 1 million. The advances of healthcare are creating a rapidly growing category of the oldest old. So right now, they're not listed, but right now the life expectancy of a little girl born in 2013 is expected to be 100 years. So they're moving their life expectancy up. So with this, when do you retire? With all of these dynamics and the global dynamics happening around the world, when is retirement and how does that fit in? You'll be interested to know, as you see, that in 1881 the German Chancellor Bismarck created the current retirement regime. We all picked it up across the globe. When he created it, the retirement age, as you see, was established at 70, but life expectancy was at 45. That meant that only a fraction of the people actually got retirement and actually got what would be then called Social Security. If we use that same formula now, we would retire and start getting Social Security at 103. So that's crazy. In fact, using the existing models that we have are all based on old demographics. And the new demographics are changing the face of retirement. They're changing the face of our planning. They're changing the face of everything. So you see 1908, state pension calculation for life expectancy was 60. 1948, it was 72. And as I mentioned a minute ago, for a girl born in 2013, life expectancy is 100. So with that, you see retirement ages are moving up. Right now in France, 59. United States, I have it 65, but I put it at 67 as some legislation is crossing across the Capitol Hill right now that is trying to move that retirement up. So it's not 65 now, 67 now, but that's one of the proposals that's being looked at. In Japan, it's 65. But by 2030, you see that Japan has moved up. The forecasting way is to have Japan move up to 78. Current legislation in Japan right now is that they're trying to move it to 75. So France is going to have to move up to 74. United States looks like it might be 72. These are forecasts. By 2050, you see that it moves up even further, Japan being leading the edge at 81. These are our retirement ages where then Social Security kicks in. Part of the reason these are forecasted to be driven up is because we're living longer. We're running out of money in terms of retirement. And so they're trying to remove the retirement age up so that you get a shorter amount of time that the general population draws down the Social Security regimes in these various countries. So now here's the term we mentioned at the outset, demographic dividend. This is the ratio. It's a ratio of dependents and children and people over 65 per 100 adults. And so it is just a measurement of how many dependents are bearing down or burdening down or dragging down 100 people in the population as it stands. So that ratio generally goes up when three things happen. You have fewer children, which means that there are fewer older people. The old people in the population are dying off mortality rates from previous generations. There are fewer children coming into the system, so because of the fewer children, there are lots of economically active adults, including women, who are entering the labor force for the first time. So you see those three characteristics combine to make a ratio that is rising. So if a family only has 2 kids, they graduate those kids from high school earlier, or they get them into school, and the women then enter the labor force looking to generate income for the families. So that generally raises the demographic dividend. So you see there on the screen a demographic dividend tends to boost economic growth. Because of that, what I just mentioned, there are a large number of working age adults that come into the labor force. It keeps wages low, it boosts savings, and then it increases the demands for goods and services because of those working adults that are creating more need for goods, services, washing machines, etc. So in 1970, the global demographic dividend was 75. But you can see in 2010, that dropped down to 52. So that means there are 75 dependents for every 100 people in 1970. That's dropped down to 52 in 2010. Again, just to review the previous slide, people are living longer and more people entering the workforce, and so that ratio then, it dropped to 52. Now China's ratio is just at 38. That means they have very few dependents drawing upon the 100 workers. So it's currently 38. The United States is 20. That is due primarily to our liberal immigration policies. Europe ratio is now around 50, but you can see what's going to start happening. By 2050, it'll be 75. Europe is an aging group of countries, and certainly on that part of the continent, and their aging population is going to begin to draw against the working population. Japan, as you see, is by 2050 will be nearing 96. That means there for every 100 working adults, there'll be 96 that are drawing against their work. And by the same year, half of their population will be over 52. So the woes that creates are that there are drawing against the current retirement regimes and the Social Security systems of those countries. So you see China, moving from Japan to China, China actually is in a similar trajectory. 2010 they had 1.3 billion. 2050 they're going to have 1.5 billion, but because they have very low replacement rates and fertility rates, they peak and then start dropping down. To 2060, it goes down to 1 billion. So you can see that's a huge drop as their replacement rates start kicking in and creating real issues for China. So the median age in 1980 was 22. By 2050, their median age will be 49. Now it's interesting to see that little news clip that you've got there. The one-child policy in China that is suppressing their fertility rates is going to drive down their economic viability. And so it has a little bit of a impact on your planning, as we'll see maybe in the latest. Certainly Howard and Clark will be the folks that you turn to for what types of impact that will have. But it's significant that China is going to start shrinking, and already, not listed in this, but some of China's woes are starting to happen already because their dividend is going up. Their demographic dividend is going up. Their population is asking for more goods and services. It's driving China's wages up, and so large companies that have been depending on China's cheap labor for a long time have now moving out of China. So Nike just recently moved their major factory out of China and moved it into Laos, because Laos is in the reverse of China, has high replacement rates, cheap labor, And so China's beginning to lose some of its reputation as a cheap labor source and therefore some of its economic viability. So here's we'll hang out in China for a second. Here's the demographic map. As you see on the left, male, on the right, female. And the oldest old, over 100, you see there are the folks that are in China right now. And it does a bubble effect, or like a reverse of an hourglass. That big bulge in the middle is where there's a huge number of economically viable and active adults. And they are currently producing all the goods and services that are coming out of China. Big bulge. But as that bulge moves up and gets without people coming in underneath them, as you see the 0 to 9 at the bottom, then they're going to have some real issues as that bulge hits retirement and then hits aging, and China won't be able to pay for its own aging population. The next slide is if you look at China as compared to India. India has a huge base at the bottom which will support its upper categories, and so India actually is very, very viable moving into the future from a population standpoint, where China, because of its low fertility rate, is going to have problems when that bulge hits the retirement age. Now, China's woes, we already talked about it, their aging population. By 2025, they'll have 200 million at 65. In 2050, that'll be 300 million people 65 and older. And so this phrase that is listed on your slide there is China will grow old before it grows rich. And that is an incredible piece of information that the Chinese government is actually looking at now. As last week they joined into their annual meeting of the Communist Party. Now Europe woes, similar thing. They have the lowest productivity, the shortest work week, highest spending on social programs, and the highest tax base. So what's going to happen similar in Europe is that they have this boom, that's the baby boom, is going to hit their retirement age. They already have woes from their financial system, and then the retiring baby boomers are going to create additional woes for Europe. Here's some European demographic maps. The first one at the top left is actually Italy. As we transferred over the slide, it got erased. But it's Italy and then Spain and then Germany, all of which have similar patterns as you've seen from China, and that lower fertility rates that creates a bump in the middle of the demographic curve, and as that gets up, they hit retirement. There's nobody there to support them, and their fiscal and healthcare systems are going to become increasingly strained. So now, in the United States, we haven't escaped our woes either. Medicare, as you see, when it was founded, had 46 workers for every beneficiary. By 65, it dropped to 4.5 for every beneficiary. 2011, it was down to 3.3, and by 2030, it will be 2.3. So we'll have 2.3 workers for every beneficiary in the Medicare system. That's not sustainable. As you'll see in the next slide, that we will become, well, the United States currently covers about 50 million people. But in 2012, that accounted for 16% of the federal budget. And you can see that the Medicare beneficiaries accounted for 57% of total spending. And if you look at that, the current projections, the Part A trust fund is expected to be depleted in 2016, not far from where we are now. And with the fewer, you see the quote, with the fewer workers to support Medicare recipients, one of three things will have to happen. Either payroll taxes are going to go up, or the government will need to pay a greater share, or the government will have to limit or change benefits. That's why in an earlier slide we talked about the retirement age moving potentially up to 67. This is the result of this kind of demographic forces. Eventually they're going to have to either raise the retirement age or do something. And so Congress is slowly looking at this. Everybody knows it's going to happen, but anybody that steps into this realm at the current time is going to get politically shot out of the saddle, and so no one's willing to address it at this time, but it's coming. So here's a couple conclusions, and then we'll come for some questions and answers as you have them and as we look at this data. So conclusions are the retirement ages across the globe will need to rise. We had a slide on that and you saw that, and that's a reality. It's not based on political assumptions or political hopes. It is a reality. And demographic changes are already posing economic challenges, especially in Europe and China. And Medicare and Medicaid will likely not survive in their current form. My personal opinion is that they will continue to survive, because anybody that says they shouldn't survive that's political suicide. But in its current form, it's unsustainable. Now, this slide does not necessarily incorporate the Affordable Care Act and all of those types of dynamics, which we can talk about if you have questions on those. But planning, the bottom line is planning for your health and long-term care needs in retirement is critical for you to consider. All things being equal, those of you who are listening to us are going to be able to be working or not working or post-working career, but be relatively healthy for an increasingly long amount of time. And so your planning of those years is critical and should start immediately. Insurance strategies should be considered during this time for this planning, and that includes long-term care insurance, that includes health insurance, etc. And finally, younger family members will be increasingly called upon to provide care for aging relatives. And those are the things that probably the folks that are listening to us are dealing with right now. I would venture to say most of you who are listening probably have parents that are in their 80s, and you're already working with those variables. So those are the conclusions that we've got, and we're open for questions. And we are ready for you to help us out. So I'm going to turn it over to Clark.
Thank you so much, Jim. As we compile some of these questions, I know everyone has a better grasp of these issues, a little bit more clarity of kind of, hey, what's going on big picture globally, then looking, at China, then looking at Europe, and then bringing it home and looking at, hey, how does that all reflect? What are the commonalities of what's going to be coming down the pipe? So thank you so much. One of the key questions that I think people are probably thinking about while we compile some of these questions is, what would you suggest people do if they have any concerns about this long-term care planning, and kind of some of the key steps around that?
Thanks, Clark. One of the main concerns that we see in the marketplace, again, our niche is that we're working with families that have an aging relative and they don't want to move to assisted living, or they're looking at their options going forward. And so long-term care is going to be a reality, not necessarily in terms of a policy at the moment in that term, but you're going to have long-term care needs that you have and that your parents are going to have. And so one of the things that is critical for you to know is, what is a long-term care policy for you? Is that a viable thing for you to include in your long-term planning? I know that we serve a lot of clients that had a long-term care policy that they purchased a long time ago, and their caps are not right. They haven't renewed it. They didn't sign up for some inflationary adjustments to their LTC policies, and those are really hurting the people that have long-term care policies now. And the reason it's killing them is because they're capped at a rate that was established in the 1970s or the 1990s, and those costs continue to go up, and there's no adjustment mechanism for it. So if you have a long-term care policy and that's the best thing for you, and your advisor will certainly give that to you, it's impossible to say from a distance how that would work for you. But if your advisor says that's the way to do it, make sure that you are considering the inflation riders that go along with that, because that will give that policy ability to meet current needs and then future needs. But other long-term things that are going on, as people live longer into their 80s and they live in good health, then the ability for you to maintain your current standard of living, or your desired standard of living, becomes increasingly important, because your reserves are going to have to last 25 and 30 years. So again, your advisors are critical in this part, in that they help you map out what this long-term care, what your long-term plans are, and how you'd fuel those. Now, one of the things that is important is that there is no one plan fits all. And if the current Affordable Care Act you're seeing that in the results of their work, that from a national side of the world, you can't plan, you have to on a federal side, but it's really hard to put things in place that hit everybody. And so those of you who are listening, and my assumption is that you're already connected to your advisors, and that is a brilliant thing for you. Nobody's plan is the same as somebody else's, and your neighbor or your friends or your family might have a different plan. but it doesn't mean that that is a good plan for you. Everything needs to be customized. So let me hand it over to Clark, and he might have another question.
Oh, that's perfect. So, I mean, you touched on the Affordable Care Act that we're hearing so much about, and with the lovely, website that we're hearing about. Can you elaborate a little bit on kind of what is involved with that? What might be affecting, elderly parents or people planning for long-term care or just an event, something down the road?
Yeah. Now I'll preface all of my comments by saying I am not a federal employee and I'm not the person that's in charge of the Obamacare legislation, but I am on top of and have been engaging with those who are involved in that. The one thing that is certain is that, well, let me tell you the uncertainties first. Nobody really knows how it's going to work currently. For individuals right now that are listening that are going to be looking at signing up for some kind of a health plan, we know that the current time of signing up, the website's crashing, and they're trying to fix that. It's been extended. The sign-up period has been extended from January 1st to March through March. So you have a little bit more time, and it's because the website's not working correctly everywhere. And so your health care will be picked up by the federal government in some way, shape, or form, or you can get your own private health care. So that's coming on the health care side. But one thing that is common among all of the players is this one fact, that the current rates for the bronze, silver, gold, and platinum plans are not going to necessarily be there. They are going to change. And the reason they're going to change is they don't know how many people are signing up. There's a real question. If young people don't sign up, then that changes the formulas, and then it changes the formulas for the sicker Americans and for older Americans. So there's a lot of questions that are being batted around right now, and there's no way to get a good solid answer on some of those things until everybody starts signing up. So with that being said, the Obamacare system does not answer currently your long-term care needs. It just means that you have health care, and most of the health care that is being provided and is forecast to be provided in the future does not cover the critical things that are going to be in your realm of concern. The realm of concern that everyone needs to look at is, what are you going to do when you stay at home for long periods of time? So for instance, the current healthcare system will fix you if you're broken, but it will send you home once you're fixed. The things that don't get fixed are things like Parkinson's, which are long-term chronic diseases, which make living at home really hard, but you're not eligible for a hospital admission. Alzheimer's is the same thing, and other forms of dementia. You're not going to be able to stay in a hospital if you have dementia because you're not technically broken from a medical standpoint. You are, but there's nothing they can do about it. And diabetes is the other one. If you have diabetes is on the rise. So if you have diabetes, you'll come in and out of the hospital, but you won't be able to stay in the hospital for long periods of time. And that means that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act and other health care solutions are not going to address those critical needs. So one of the things that we say when we do our work with our client base around even the country is that you've got to have some part of your planning that incorporates you living at home but not being mobile, not being totally healthy, not being able to live by yourself. So you have to look at that, live by yourself safely. You have to consider some part of that plan. Either you're going to be having a long-term care policy, or you've got your financials set so that it can pay for a care that goes into that time, or that you plan to live with your children, or that you plan to go into a facility. And those are things that all revolve around planning that you can currently take into consideration and plan for now.
That's great. I mean, I know that's something that you know, when we get older, that's a commonality of what we're starting to look at. You know, bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier of, you know, demographics and looking at China. You know, there's that speculation that the U.S. economy is declining, where China's is increasing. You know, it's predicted that China will surpass the U.S. as the world's largest economy soon. The demographics don't seem to support this. Can you comment?
That's a very perceptive question, and I salute whoever wrote that in. The reason that that is very perceptive and very important is that China will, in fact, and could increase as in terms of total size their economy in relation to ours, but their current economy is not going to sustain its size as their demographic moves forward. So the question that you wrote in is extraordinarily perceptive on your part. What will happen is that China will not be able to sustain its economic size globally and will begin to shrink. And if you watch the evidences of this, I mentioned earlier that China is starting to lose some of its low-end or cheap labor type industries, tennis shoes, other small manufacturing pieces. And then as its population ages, they're going to have to introduce a regime for their Social Security, which they did last year. They introduced the first regime for Chinese that mimics or mirrors a kind of Social Security. And as that comes in, they will not be able to sustain economic growth. Now, they're not going to go away anytime soon by any stretch. China's got a lot of people. But what is happening is that their economic system is unsustainable. So I've heard from two different sources that you can take this completely as subjective, but I've heard two different sources, one from London and one from Oxford, that said that China is moving some of its resources overseas because they understand the nature of the fact that their demographics are going to mean their economics are being driven down. So so if you know that that's coming and you can see that driven by demographics, you'll be way ahead of the power curve to interpret news reports and other things that talk about total economic growth.
Thanks, Jim. Another question that came in is, looking at, our area, our local area in terms of care, what is the cost of long-term care services in our area? And then kind of you can lead into another question, we'll kind of piggyback. Some of these facilities, it's been hearing that they're not allowing new people in if you don't have long-term care insurance. Is that accurate? So if you can touch on those two things.
Yeah, that's also a good question. I'll tell you what the median is both in this market and then across the nation. And this was a State Farm insurance study, so I'm not quoting it from the national stats. I'm not quoting from some sort of a guess. So State Farm did it, and MetLife also does an annual study. So I think Genworth Financial does the same thing. And if you're interested, you could go to State Farm's website, Genworth Financial's website, and MetLife's website and get this kind of information. So with that being said, the median cost of care across the nation is about $18 per hour for a person coming into the home to provide non-medical custodial care. The median in this market is about $22 an hour, and it's because of our economic bubble in this area, cost of labor, et cetera. So we're $3 to $5 above the median across the nation. If you want a live-in person in your home, that means a person that's living in your home doing 24-hour, 7-day-a-week care, the median across the nation is let me see if I can get it right. I think it's about $190 a day. The median in this market is about $225 to $240 a day. So it's a broad range in the local market. But those are the medians on live-in care here. So if most people that get custodial non-medical care start out with some version of hourly service, that they have a caregiver come in either privately through an individual or through an agency, and then live-in care almost exclusive, well, it's the same thing, either privately hired or through an agency, and those are the medians. Now, there's lots of variation in and around there, but those are the medians in the market. Now, the other side of that question is that some long-term care facilities may not accept residents who don't have long-term care insurance, and that's not completely accurate. The reason that it's not is that long-term care facilities just want to get paid. And so if they have a long-term care facility, if the person coming in has a long-term care policy, that means that they'll be paid, so they'll be happy to accept people with LTCs. If they don't have a long-term care policy, there is an increasing scrutiny on clients and their financial resources and their ability to pay before they're accepted in. And so the the two kinds of facilities, assisted living facilities such as a Sunrise, that is just for those that need care, but it's not necessarily a continuing care all the way into the hospice side of the world. And so what happens in assisted living facilities is that they pretty much take you as long as you can show that you pay. Some of the communities, the retirement communities that are around, they're called continuing care retirement communities. They have the whole spectrum from independent living all the way to hospice and end-of-life care. Those facilities generally do a screening process in advance and make sure that you have a rather large deposit in place in order to provide for your care should your finances run out. And some agencies or some of those communities provide for people that run out of resources, and some just kick the person out, the resident out when they run out of resources. So you have to be very careful when you're signing up for one of the senior living communities or a continuing care retirement community, and ask what is their policy when resources run out, because they'll need to know how they handle that. But it's a tremendously important planning item for you to know where do you want to end up, and then how much money is it going to take you to get there. And that's going to be one of the key things that you need to look at.
Thanks so much. So there's another question that we have that, and this is something that, we at EBW are always looking at is, what is the cost for, someone that needs care? What do we need to set aside? And like one of the numbers for, let's say, a woman retiring in 2020, how much does she need? We've heard things such as, $357,000 set aside for just specifically for healthcare costs. Is that true? And is there any kind of number out there that you've seen, or what can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And we mentioned earlier about the need to be very customized in terms of what you're working with your advisor on. And so there's so many variables that it is impossible to determine an exact amount that you're going to need to set aside because of the variables of your individual situation. So somebody that is in ill health and maybe is not able to has COPD or some diabetes or Parkinson's or Alzheimer's in their family, they might need to set aside more. Others might need to set aside less. So there is no predetermined amount. What you would want to do is work with your advisor in order to understand what the dynamics of your current financial situation, where you want to end up, where you want to retire, what your current income needs, and what are your current income, what is your current income, and what are your current income or your future income needs. Those things are going to be critical for you to determine. But it's impossible to give one number as a set-aside. It's really the best thing to do is work with your financial advisor to come up with that number, because it's near impossible to judge all those characteristics just by saying one thing. So if I gave a number, like it was quoted in the question, is it 300,000, 350,000? If you said, yeah, it's 350,000, some people will run out of money really fast with that. And some people, that'll last them forever. So you just got to make sure that you work with your individual advisor.
Okay, and one another question that came in is, when we're looking at the U.S. demographic, or when we're looking at the demographic maps, there really wasn't any term of or a depiction of what the U.S. demographic map looks like. And so can you just elaborate on, does it look the same? Is it the same bulge of, kind of in the middle and then there's not enough coming behind? Or is it something similar to India where it's, more on the back end and so they're able to sustain? Can you just elaborate on the U.S. side of that map?
The good news on the U.S. side of the world is that we are the second youngest country on the planet, depending on, there's differences in some of those forecasts, but Canada currently is the youngest country on the planet, and then the United States is second. And the reason for that is our liberal immigration policies that we've had as the shining example across the world of places where there's the land of opportunity and the Statue of Liberty. Give me your poor, your masses, your huddled masses. And so we've been open with our immigration, and we have a lot of problems because of that, a lot of unregistered or illegal immigrants. But the bottom line, or the good news of that, is that we have a lot of young people coming into America trying to make their future. So we are in a great position demographically. If you saw on one of the earlier slides, our demographic dividend is currently at 20, whereas China is at 38. Even though they have a larger population, they have a larger demographic dividend. And so we are very nicely situated to move in the future. Now we still have our woes, as you saw in those screens, the earlier slides, in that Medicare and Medicaid will not continue to exist in their current form because our baby boomers are going to retire, and that's going to happen en masse. But we are not as nearly as critical as, say, Europe or as China, that had its one-child policy, which then restricted fertility rates down to 1, and that is just going to have horrible effects on their economic future because of demographics. I'd need to mention also, just to feel the weight of the retirement in the United States, well, across the world, starting in January 1, 2012, 10,000 people, actually this is in the United States, but similar across the world, January 1, 2012, 10,000 people per day turned 65. So right now, 20% of Florida's population is over 65. And a lot of people travel in Florida and comment on the uniqueness of Florida and its retirement side of the world because the 20% is over 65. By 2030, 20% of the United States will be over 65. So even though we're aging quickly, the immigration has kept us afloat. So interesting, though more trivial from our perspective, is that the United States Congress is considering an immigration bill, put it off, and then we'll reintroduce it. But that is a critical component to our economic viability in the future.
Jim, well, we got some great, and I think we have one more question. These are some great questions coming in. The last question that we have for today, I believe, is, in my reading on these topics, I have read an interesting fact. There's a huge increase in medical expenditures and therefore Medicare reimbursement for the end of care treatment when cures are no longer possible. Can you provide some information what you might foresee in legislative changes in Medicare and kind of some things in the future, and just kind of touch on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting and delicate question, in that most expenditures, the highest number of expenditures in Medicare, occur in the last 2 years of life. And so one of the ways that others have taken that kind of information and looked at it is that there might be, under the Affordable Care Act, some sort of a curtailing or a different kind of management for end-of-life care. And in some places, it's even called the death panel, where they decide what treatment you're going to get and what treatment you're not going to get, and if that's going to occur. So one of the forecasters of our system is certainly the European system, and in Europe, there is a sense in which the medical doctor works with the family. Well, this is true. The medical doctor works with the family to determine what is needed for the family member as they're coming to the end of life. And even though it's a socialized medicine system, and the national healthcare system is what it is there, the doctor is still in consultation with the family to see if there are things that are heroic efforts that can be made, even though the person is at the end of life. So even in a socialized medicine system where Europe is now, and where we're in some degrees headed, although ours is a hybrid of that, there doesn't seem to be a place where they're going to rationalize end-of-life, not rationalize, but ration end-of-life care. The doctor still is considered the person in charge of what is needed and what is able to be workable. But there will be, because of the sheer number of people, there will be what will end up being rationing of health care in that, and that's an emotionally charged term, so it may be the wrong term. But there will be places where you won't be getting elective surgeries or elective care until it becomes critical, and just because of the sheer number of people that are there. So that's going to be the reality of our system, and it's the reality of the global system, is that if you're on a nationalized system and you have non-life-threatening care, you're going to be put in a queue or in a line, and you're going to have to wait for that either cosmetic or non-life-threatening elective type care. But if you've got life-threatening or critical care needs, then generally you're put at the front of the list. But there's no way to forecast individual family circumstances just because there's no way to forecast that. But an excellent question. Medicare will not be able to, it's going to have to change, and what its form is or will be is not yet able to be discerned, only because Congress has not had the necessity nor the political will to take on that just at the moment. And then, of course, the Affordable Care Act has changed some of the parameters, or many of the parameters, which then makes it very much more challenging to even make accurate or anywhere near concise forecasts of what might happen.
Well, excellent, Jim. This has been great. I know, on behalf of Egan Berger and Weiner, we're so glad that you were here to be able to talk with our clients. I know they got a lot out of it, and this is something that we always want to bring to our clients, is giving them, insight, education, and just give them something to be thinking about in the planning process. So thank you. For those of you that are wondering, hey, can I get a copy or get some more information on kind of what was discussed, we will of course be putting this on our website in the near future, so that you'll be able to find some more information and a summary of kind of what was discussed. And then I encourage you, if there's any question that you have that you didn't get it answered, or if you have some concerns, feel free to reach out to any of your Egan Berger and Weiner financial advisors. Let them know kind of that you were on the call, that you had some questions, and set up a meeting, because it is important. So that being said, we will wrap up this quarterly webinar, and I wish on behalf of Egan Berger and Weiner that everyone has a safe holiday and a happy Thanksgiving. Thank you so much.